Okay. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight at one of our 2-a-month community information sessions. My name is Deb Hodgson. For those of you who don't know me, I'm with New Hampshire for Safe Technology, and we co-host these along with Cece with Mass from Safe Technology as partners in everything. And I ask that you mute yourself, and there'll be plenty of time at the end for questions if anybody has them. You can choose to raise your hand or put something in the chat. And
oh gosh,
somebody's not muted. And we did have a big day yesterday in Concord. For those who aren't aware, the New Hampshire House Bill 298 at a public hearing at the Science, Technology, and Energy Committee at the Legislative Office Building. And I'm sure Cece will get into a little bit of that tonight. So I want to thank everyone who participated in that and supported us, especially Cece Doucette. Here you go.
Well, thank you so much for that introduction, Deb. I'm going to go ahead and change the spotlight and welcome everybody. I'm going to go ahead now and do a screen sharing and want you to know that the slides that we present tonight, Deb, can you give me a nod if you can see my slides? Okay, great. After tonight, in a day or two, we will send out the video recording of this session, and we will also send out my slides. And before we get started, we want to say, don't take our word on any of this. We want you to know the facts. And so in my slides, wherever you see a blue underline, that's going to be information that you can use as a launch point to go look for yourself. So I'd like to share a little bit about how I got into this issue. I used to help run the local education foundation for my children's schools. And we were at the time when we were hearing about this 21st century classroom and how we were going to need to have all this new technology for our children to succeed in the world. And our school budgets had been cut to the bone year after year. So we didn't have money for all this new technology. So, you know, good doobie parents, we stepped in and started doing fundraising. Then one night at book group, my girlfriend, Wendy, who's an electrical engineer, tipped us off that there could be biological effects. And, you know, it was book group, so I just kind of made a mental note of it. Then not long after that, something else crossed my desk that insinuated the same thing. And I thought, wow, if there's anything to this, I want to know, because I spent 8 years bringing it into my kids' schools. So long story short, we became the first public school district in the United States to even have this little sign on the walls of our classrooms. Turn off these devices when not in use, turn the Wi-Fi on only when needed, always use it on a solid surface, not your body. And, you know, viewing distance, like my mom used to tell me when I was little, don't stand close to the TV, it'll ruin your eyes. Well, what she was telling me that I now understand better is that all of this technology has its own electromagnetic field that is stronger than our own body's electromagnetic field. So mom was right. We need to keep our distance from these man-made energies like this. So after I started reading the science and learning what this is, and we'll share the science with you momentarily, I worked with my state senator to introduce legislation in Massachusetts back in 2014. We wrote our first bill and introduced it in 2015. But most importantly is that through Deb Hodgson's efforts with her state rep, Patrick Abrami, and Senator Dr. Tom Sherman, she was able to work with them, and Rep. Abrami introduced a bill that we'll see in a few minutes produce the groundbreaking commission report that documents a lot of really important facts. So on this journey, I've had the privilege of being introduced to many of the world's leading scientists and doctors. And Dr. Mikko Ahonen is one of those scientists out of Finland. And he and I have developed an online course that can be taken by large groups all at once. So for example, if you work in a company, they could have their employee, they could license the course, have their employees take just like a half an hour maybe an hour if they go digging through the resources. And altogether, the company can learn about wireless risks and better, safer alternatives. And so Dr. Honan and I have been working very diligently to move that from an older system to a new system, and we're just ready to launch that again. So anybody's welcome to go look at that course. But we can literally train an entire school or a municipality or a workforce. And if a corporation or a company licenses our course, we will then give them the option to designate a local school, and we will donate the licensing for the school for free. So we want to keep this win-win Robin Hood model going so that we can protect ourselves, the children, and all the pollinators and everything else in our environment. So when I first figured out what wireless harms were, I was the only person for the first 2 years that I could talk to. And honestly, I didn't really even know what I was saying at that point. I was very overwhelmed. Then fast forward to 2016, and we had a panel of world-leading experts come to our state house in Massachusetts to ask for right-to-know legislation. And it was a standing room only crowd in this hearing hall at the state house. And lo and behold, there were people all over the state and some who had come in from other states who knew about this issue. And so it was very comforting, first of all, to be validated with that. Deb, can you see who's speaking and mute that person, please? Thank you. And then from there, as I connected with other residents, we eventually formed Massachusetts for Safe Technology. And a nurse who had been to a brain health conference learned about EMFs, and she gave me the funding to build this website. So if you go out to our website, you'll find information.
You know, I've got a thing that says mute, and mute my audio.
There you go. Good job. So you will find what we're doing at the state level with our state agencies and the legislators. You'll find out what we're doing with our Department of Public Health and Healthy Human Services. So lots of good resources, as well as the science and any events that we've got coming up and news that is getting published in our local papers, because mainstream media pretty much stays away from this, and we'll explain that more. So please feel free to use this as a resource to go out and gather facts. And I like to include this next link here for you, because when we open the technology safety conversation, it often comes out of left field for most people. So I was invited to chair or to co-chair the technology panel for something called the Health in Buildings Roundtable Conference that was held down at the National Institutes of Health. And we had Dr. Martin Pall, who's one of the world's leading scientists on this topic. We had Frank Clegg, who's the retired president of Microsoft Canada. And when Mr. Clegg retired, he wanted to know more about this issue. So he sought out a dozen of the world's leading experts on this and came back and said, RFCC guidelines in the US are not safe, nor are Canada's Safety Code 6 guidelines. So we also have Theodora Scorato from the Environmental Health Trust. She's the executive director, and she talks about what other countries are doing to address this. And then we had Peter Sullivan, who's a philanthropist, and he used to be a fighter pilot, kind of like Top Gun. And then he later on went to work as an engineer in Silicon Valley, and he, you know, his friends like invented cell phones and stuff. So, but Peter's health started crashing. He dropped a lot of weight. His teeth started getting very brittle. And then when his two sons came into the preschool years, they both were diagnosed on the autism spectrum. So Peter got to the bottom of all of this, and he tells families now, as a first step, get a digital detox, get the wireless out of the living environment, especially the sleeping environment. And I found Peter's work through a YouTube video at a conference he was speaking to. And he said that now his sons are grown young men, and neither of them are on the autism spectrum anymore. And I was just dumbfounded, because I didn't even know getting off the autism spectrum was an option. But it turns out with People who have de novo mutations, which means it didn't come from mom or it didn't come from dad, it came from somewhere in the environment. But if you clean up the environment, oftentimes there can be very, very significant health gains. And again, every person's body is very individual. So we don't want to make any promises, but we can tell you that there are great success stories out there. And with a little due diligence on our own part, perhaps we can see gains in our health too. One of the biggest gaps that we had back in 2013, when I first started learning about this, is that so many people are getting sick and misdiagnosed, and we had no way to train our doctors, our nurses, our other healthcare practitioners, our first responders, the firefighters, the police. And now we are so fortunate to have the EMF medical conference. And again, EMF just means the electromagnetic fields of man-made microwave radiation that are pulsated constantly from all of our wireless technology. They also address some of the other kinds of electromagnetic fields that come from electricity and other sources. But for tonight's talk, we'll be focusing on the man-made microwave radiation. So I want you to know that this conference, although it was held in 2021, that was in the heart of the pandemic. And so we had to pivot and put that conference online. And although it's much richer to go to a conference in person so you can have all these synergies with the other attendees, what a gift that we had to pre-record the lectures. And then we had all of the panelists live at the conference. And so those videos of all the speakers and all the panel discussions are now available online for you to give information to your healthcare teams and your first responders to say, hey, this is a very quickly emerging public health crisis, and you can be trained. There's 24.5 continuing medical education credits, and the cost of the conference has been dropped dramatically. So anybody can go out there. The public can even go and take this conference for, I think, $19. And for the healthcare practitioners, it's under $50 to get 24.5 continuing education credits. So please take advantage of the resources that we're sharing with you tonight. So that's how I got engaged in all of this. And then I think what helped my schools become the first in the nation to actually take action on this was when they read the legal fine print. So anybody who's with us tonight, we invite you to take out, if you have an iPhone, take out your iPhone and go into settings. If you don't own an iPhone, but you have a different device, there's a wonderful website called See the Fine Print, and it's got disclaimers in there from other wireless products. For example, in the old iPad fine print disclaimer, it talks about seizures, blackouts, eye strain. But for anybody who's got their iPhone out now, go into settings, go down a little bit and hit general. On a really old phone, you would hit about, but most people have upgraded. So usually from general, you go right down to legal and regulatory. And that was such a nice acronym because you could remember it by thinking, hey, this gal told me how to find this. So GAL, we've lost the A, but the L is still there. Once you're in legal and regulatory, about 4 down, you'll see RF exposure. That's this man-made radio frequency, electromagnetic fields of microwave radiation that they politely call energy in that legal fine print disclaimer. But they've in it, and it's been in there all along, and very few people know it. So this is perhaps one of the quickest ways to get somebody's attention on this issue. Just say, hey, do you happen to have an iPhone? I want to show you something. Because when you first start the conversation, because of the heavy media and industry influence on this topic, their first thought might be, oh, tinfoil hat conspiracy theorist. But as soon as you show somebody the legal fine print in their own device that says this device was tested at a distance away from the body. So if you're holding that radiating device, or you're putting it in your bra, or you're tucking it in your shirt pocket, or you're putting it in your waistband or your back pocket, you are exceeding the FCC's public radiation exposure limits. And in a subsequent paragraph, they say, well, if you want to be a little careful, consider using a speakerphone or a headset. Now, I'm going to pause my sharing for just a moment to show you that there are solutions at every turn, folks. If you have to use a radiating device and you want to create some distance, you can look for an air tube, or sometimes it's called a hollow tube headset. And that hollow tube part means that it's only got rubber. Watch out for any that might have magnets or other metal up by the ears. This is a hollow tube headset. I'll hold it against my dark jacket here. It's just got rubber. It's got good acoustics, much like a doctor's stethoscope would. And then it comes down here to these two little ferrite beads that break any radiation signal that might be coming up the wire. Okay. So if you plug this into your device, that allows you to then set the device far enough away from you that you're not getting as much radiation. But don't be fooled. There's no safe level of microwave radiation in the scientific literature. But there are solutions to at least take precautionary steps. So when I first learned about this, and it's an invisible toxin, and if COVID taught us nothing else, it's that we've got to be critically aware of invisible exposures in our environment. So I learned that there are microwave radiation detection meters, and this is the one that was recommended at the EMF medical conference. And I apologize, I got to go run and grab my cell phone because I didn't bring it in here. Oh, good thing I don't still have my jammy bottoms on there. So what I'm going to do is give you a demonstration of what my house looks like. And it wasn't easy. I circled my tail for several months before I finally said, look, I know too much and it's my job as a mother to protect my family. So this is the Safe and Sound Pro 2 broadband radio frequency meter. And it's got 3 sets of numbers there, which I know you're not going to be able to see very clearly from where you are, but I will tell you that the middle number is called the max or the maximum. And the goal in the scientific literature is to be at 10 or less in our indoor spaces. And the unit of measurement that's used is something called a microwatt per square meter. And I'm not a scientist or a mathematician. I'm a word girl. So I'm like, what does that mean? Well, basically within like 3 feet of air, how much radiation can we perhaps do okay with? Again, no safe level, but let's minimize it to as low as reasonably achievable. So in my house right now, we want to be under 10. My house is a 5. But watch what happens when I take my cell phone out of airplane mode, and I keep my cell phone in airplane mode as a rule. And so now I'm turning back on the antennas, and you can see we are no longer in the green. We are in the screaming, flashing red, and I haven't even done anything. This is just turning it on and activating the connections from my cell phone to the nearest cell tower, or it's looking for routers and stuff too. So I don't want to radiate myself anymore. So I turned off my cell phone, and you can see after a couple seconds, the radiation dissipated, and now we're back down into that nice green level. Remember, we were at 5. By turning on the antennas in my cell phone, we went to 1,380,000 microwatts per square meter. We want to be under 10. So this is very serious. And I'm going to resume my screen sharing. Hang on one sec. I want to see if it will take me back to where we left off. Yeah, here we go. This should be coming back up. shortly. Okay. So we're back online with my slides. This taught us how to show yourself and others where that legal fine print is. And once I figured out there was a radio frequency detection meter that a community could use, I went after a grant. And that too wasn't easy. It took me 3 grant cycles and educating every one of the members of our select board, and then our library director, and then the library board of trustees. But we persist. And in the end, Ashland, Massachusetts became the first public library in the country to put one of these radio frequency radiation detection meters on loan, so that anybody with a library card for our town can take it out for a week, go home, measure their home, measure their car, measure their work, measure their schools, wherever they spend time, and just gather the data. And then one by one, figure out where the exposures are coming from and have a choice in what you might do with that. When we did the first medical conference in 2019, I flew all the way out to California to present on state and local policy. And I met a medical doctor out there, Dr. Judy Safrir. And when we came back to Massachusetts, it turns out she just lived a few towns over from me. We went after a state grant that was put out by our cultural council. And she and I were able to put another one of these acoustimeters on loan in the public library. And that's the one that Deb uses today too. And it's a great meter. Since that one came out, this Safe and Sound Pro 2 was introduced to the market, and it just has a few more features to it, like you can plug it in and let it run using kind of like a cell phone charger that fits the port on here. So Pittsfield in Massachusetts, most libraries today have a library of things, and in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, they just budgeted it right out of their library budget, and they put this one on loan in their library. So that's something that you guys might be able to do in your own communities, is try and get one of these put on loan. And feel free to reach out. I can provide you with some information that we used in our grant processes here. And then my local cable station was wonderful. They brought resources to my home, and we did a walkthrough of my house just to show where most of our homes have a lot of these radiation exposures that it's invisible, so we don't think about it. So we walked around my house in this 23-minute public service announcement. It's out online. It's gotten over 10,000 hits. And I like to think that, you know, how cool is that? We spent one afternoon doing this, and maybe 10,000 people know a little bit more about how to keep themselves safe. So look to your local cable stations. They are like the last bastion of independent reporting left out there. And they love to have citizens come to them and say, hey, I have an idea for a program. What do you think? And I can be brought in to do interviews. There may be other experts in your area. We can certainly try and hook you up with them. But use your local cable stations. They can be very helpful. So now let's talk about what the science does tell us. And first, we'll look at the long-term effects. And the United States National Toxicology Program is part of the National Institutes of Health and the National Institutes of Environmental Health Sciences. And they did a study for about 20 years, starting way back when cell phones were the technology of the day, before we had any of this other stuff that we've gotten into. And they went in to explore whether cell phones could cause cancer or not. And lo and behold, they had an unprecedented 3-day peer review 20 years later at the National Institutes of Health. And there were world-leading experts who came to this hearing. And at the end of the day, in their final report, they document clear evidence of cancerous tumors and DNA damage and a host of other effects that they found in their rodent studies. And oftentimes the industry will get a hold of these good studies, and then they will say, oh, that's just one study. You need more than one study to prove anything. Right on the heels of our big study, $30 million coming out, The Ramazzini Institute in Italy concluded another large study based on cell towers, or what they call base stations or masts. And guess what? They found the same evidence of harm that we found from the cell phones. So we don't need more science. Science is continually evolving. We can get sharper on what we know, but we don't need more science to take action today. What we need is an informed public and accountability from our policymakers. So DNA damage, which we know is the roadmap to grow a proper anything from a baby to a plant, a pollinator, and every other biological system on our planet. It was the infertility studies that got me on my feet. I started reading them, and I learned that they've taken male human sperm and exposed it to a laptop with the antennas radiating, and it changed the DNA. It slowed the motility of the sperm, and it caused far fewer sperm to be viable in just 4 hours of exposure to this microwave radiation. So that was the day that I found my voice, because we had just sent our oldest daughter up to college with her MacBook. We had just bought our youngest daughter as she headed into high school. At Christmas, we gave her a laptop, and where they both using them, but on top of their reproductive organs. And now we have even more studies, like from Kaiser Permanente, showing that women who use wireless technology have higher miscarriage rates. So this is very serious for men and women alike. Neurotoxicity is huge today. Before the pandemic, we were literally at epidemic proportions of anxiety and depression. We are seeing suicidal ideation among children, let alone adults, like we have never seen before. We know this damages the brain. Attention deficit disorder, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Dr. Hugh Taylor, who runs the OBGYN program at Yale Medical, he has done some of the rodent studies and showed that when you expose the pregnant mice to microwave radiation, those pups come out and wind up bouncing off the walls of their cage, much like a child who has lost its focus. Dr. Martha Herbert founded the autism lab at Massachusetts General Hospital. And she tells us that she sees patients and families in her care. And what we know happens with microwave radiation is happening to the families in her care. Dr. Martin Pall did a review on the science behind Alzheimer's and the brain damage that happens with that. And he came out with a really good paper that is showing that where, just like cancers, Alzheimer's used to take decades to surface. And he reports now, because we are putting so many intoxicants in the atmosphere of the brain, that we are now seeing Alzheimer's, not just in 70 and 80-year-olds, but 60s, 50s, 40s, 30s, and even some 20-year-old patients are being diagnosed with Alzheimer's in their 20s. So we're very grateful when other groups begin to report on this. And some of you may know the Environmental Working Group. I know as a mom, I first learned about their work because they put out a pesticide fact sheet called the Clean 15 and the Dirty Dozen to give you guidance on which produce you should really buy organic if you can get it, and others that are somewhat protected and the pesticides aren't penetrating as deeply into them. So I knew about EWG before I even knew about wireless radiation. And now they have staff that are working on this, and they came out with a fact sheet called Protecting Kids from Wireless Radiation in School and at Home. They also did one about the neurotoxic effects and the immune system here. So those resources are widely available. And we need to be aware that children are especially vulnerable to any kind of environmental toxin. They are not just little adults. Their very systems, their immune system, their central nervous system are still under development. And as this diagram here by Dr. Om Gandhi illustrates, these are 3 head models turned on their sides. The little yellow part is the ear. So if you as an adult put the phone up to your head, it's going to penetrate microwave radiation into your brain directly about 1/3 of the way through. On a 10-year-old child in the middle, it goes about 2/3 of the way into the brain. And on a 5-year-old child, it's penetrating almost the entire brain. And science tells us why. A child's skull is not fully developed, so they don't have the benefit of that much more of a barrier to this radiation. And the brain itself of a child has a higher water content. And we know through our microwave ovens that that's how the heating takes place. But as we'll learn, it's not just about heating effects with these cell antennas, our wearables, our laptops, our tablets, our Roku, our Chromecast, our smart TVs, our wireless gaming devices, our baby monitors, every single product that is not plugged in and is sending signal is using this microwave radiation. So those are some of the long-term concerns. In the short term, the good news is after learning about this through one of our educational webinars, or perhaps you've had good fortune to talk to others who know about this issue, people start recognizing the symptoms and they'll come back and they'll go, Cece, I didn't want to know about this. I didn't want to hear it. But once you taught us what these microwave sickness symptoms are, people are starting to unplug things at night or turn them off and create a sleep sanctuary. And then time and again, they come back and say, oh my gosh, I slept through the night for the first time in ages, or my headache's gone. I'm feeling less anxious or depressed. My children's behavior issues have calmed way down. So let's take a look at this. There's a new term in our vernacular called electromagnetic sensitivities. That's the term that's used by the Americans with Disabilities Act. Some people will take offense at the term sensitivity because we're all bioelectric beings, and this is just overpowering our own natural systems. Some people feel symptoms very soon. Others, it may be a longer term cumulative effect that may then send them over to the tipping point. Or maybe they're already suffering symptoms and they would never guess to connect them to their microwave radiation exposures. So since 2002, the ADA has recognized electromagnetic sensitivities. So when you're talking to people about this, that's an important fact to share, is that although the media has kept it out of, the mainstream because they're funded by advertising dollars, this has been going on for 2 decades that we know of. So one of the biggest things that gets better is insomnia. And what the science tells us is that as part of our circadian rhythm, in the wee hours of darkness, the pineal gland in the brain releases melatonin. Now, melatonin goes into our system and regulates our sleep, but it also helps through the bloodstream to clear out the regular debris from cell repair and regeneration while we sleep. Well, guess what? This radiation is an invisible man-made light form, and our brain can't tell the difference from natural daylight and this man-made light. And so our brain thinks the lights are on, and therefore, sorry about that. Therefore, it doesn't properly release the melatonin to go in and regulate our sleep and clean up. So here we're disabling our own body's mechanism of cell repair and regeneration. Stabbing, searing headaches, migraines. My daughter was getting she got an optical migraine in high school. What kid should be getting a migraine? Once I stopped circling my tail and I committed to cleaning this up in my home, her headaches and her nosebleeds all but disappeared, unless she let herself get too dehydrated, and then she might get a headache or a nosebleed. But significant improvements in a short amount of time. Chronic fatigue. Our poor little cells only have so much energy in them, and it's pretty well calibrated to do everyday normal cell repair and regeneration. When we leave these environmental exposures pulsating at our bodies night and day, we can't keep up. And so it's no wonder that so many people are so exhausted today. And then others will report pain in the back of the head or elsewhere from unidentified sources that their doctors can't figure it out. Skin, rashes, heating, flushing, tingling. These are all happening and people have no idea why. Heartbeats based on your body, it might go too fast or too slow. Cognitive impairment's a big one. You know, it's not just as we age anymore. So many people can't hold a thought. Anger and behavior issues. Remember, this is a neurotoxin. And one of the most heartbreaking things that I learned at the EMF medical conference is that more than one of the presenters, the scientists and doctors, said that if we do not do something about this and get ahead of it and in short order, we can expect to see many more of the societal outbursts that we've seen with mass shootings and other harms as we change the gray matter and the white matter of the brain with this microwave radiation. So the anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation, the science shows that we have something to protect our brains called the blood-brain barrier. And what Dr. Palpatcher and other researchers identified long ago is that when we are being pulsated by this spiked erratic microwave radiation, it can break through and open that blood-brain barrier. So now as toxins are being escorted out of the body through the bloodstream, they can permeate into the brain. So all this toxicity can turn into neurotoxicity. So we know why now. We know many different mechanisms of harm. And the industry for a long time spun it that, oh, there's no mechanism of harm identified. Let's just keep doing what we're doing. But now the science has come so far that we do know. And we also know that it's not just you and I. As I mentioned earlier, it's every biological cell on the planet is impacted by man-made radio frequency microwave radiation. And our poor disappearing pollinators, they're disappearing by the dozens these days. And the birds, they both have their own built-in navigation systems that are meant to be synchronized with the Earth's own electromagnetic field. And there's something called Schumann's resonance that tells us that the Earth pulses its own electromagnetic field like 7.83 times a second. Well, what we've done today is we've gotten so fancy. A megahertz means it's getting a microwave pulsation 1,000,000 times a second. And a gigahertz means 1,000,000,000 times in 1 second. There are these spiked erratic pounces of microwave radiation. So our poor birds and our pollinators and all the other insects and species, they are stuck in this huge world of electrosmog, and it's dysregulating their own navigation system. So when we talk about colony collapse, and when 5G was tested, for example, in The Hague in the Netherlands, birds literally dropped out of the sky, either stunned or dead from the microwave radiation. So it's a very serious issue. And again, you can go look at these resources at this planetary impact link. But for those who are working hard on climate change, there's a lot of important information on this too. First of all, the horrific conditions down in the Congo and elsewhere where human atrocities are taking place to extract minerals that then get put into our electronic devices. Data warehouses, networks, personal devices are all consuming energy all the time unless we know to turn things off when we're not using them or to choose an alternate way to connect to technology without the radiation and without so much energy consumption. There was a Greenpeace analyst back in 2012, that's more than a decade ago, and look at how much more we've included in the last decade. But in 2012, this Greenpeace analyst indicated that if the cloud were a country, it would be the 5th largest consumer of energy in the world. And it's only gotten far worse from there. So with our personal devices, the industry is pushing all these streaming services Streaming consumes huge amounts of energy. Every time we send and receive something, we're using energy. Every time we charge and recharge our wireless devices, we're consuming energy. And in the background, we've all been seduced into putting all these cool apps on our devices. Those are always doing updates in the background too. So today's message is not no technology. It's safe, responsible technology. And we know how to get there, and we'll share that with you tonight too. But for me, when I fell down the rabbit hole on this issue, I kept scratching my head going, look, if little me can go out and just read all this science showing peer-reviewed, highly regarded journals showing all this harm, surely somebody's got to have our backs on this. And then 2 years later, in 2015, Harvard Law School Center for Ethics came out with this incredible report called Captured Agency: How the Federal Communications Commission is Dominated by the Industries it Presumably Regulates. And look at the graphic they chose for this report. It's a revolving door, because we have industry people now running our Federal Communications Commission. So we have huge conflicts of interest there. So that was one of my missing pieces. It was like, oh man, you mean there is nobody up above us looking out for public health over corporate profit? So Captured Agency is free and online. Anybody can read that. More recently, just this past November, ProPublica did a similar expose on how the FCC shields cell phone companies from safety concerns. So that's more recent. And then what I learned, and again, you don't have to dig very far to dig this stuff out, but the FDA turned around to the FCC and said, oh, that $30 million study that our own government did that found clear evidence of cancerous tumors and DNA damage, we don't really believe that. Well, it was the FDA 20 years ago that commissioned that study. They were responsible for taking that and translating it into public policy to protect the public. So why would the guy who's running the radiation area of FDA today tell the FCC, keep doing what you're doing? Well, go look at his background. Dr. Jeffrey Shuren is married to a woman who's a partner in a law firm that represents the wireless industry and other big environmental polluters. So I was giving a presentation to a school wellness group one time, and as I'm presenting the facts, there was a guy at the table on his tablet who was fact-checking me, and he said, well, look, the New York Times says that this is all just fear-mongering by the Russians, you know? And so some people will look to the New York Times expecting them to be independent, but how would you know that they have the wireless industry on their board? How would you know that they have a 5G test lab, I think with Verizon, right at the New York Times? So they're deep in bed with industry, so we can't even trust the New York Times anymore. And it goes sadly all the way up to the World Health Organization. They are now reopening an investigation because of those animal studies that were completed. Back in 2011, they looked at this issue and they said, wow, it looks like there's something here, but what we're missing is the animal studies. And so back in 2011, there was enough evidence that they declared this is a group 2B possible human carcinogen. And the piece of science that was missing was the animal studies. Now that the U.S. National Toxicology Program and the Ramazzini Institute and others have completed studies showing clear evidence of cancer, the World Health Organization has reopened their investigation. But as with other areas, the industry has deep pockets and heavy influence. Who would know? Let me go back for a sec. Who would know that there's two groups at the World Health Organization? One is represented by the scientists who want to get to the truth. The other is represented by the wireless industry. And so now we're watching to see what they're doing with this investigation, because it may well be that they just stack the deck with industry people again at the World Health Organization. But if you go look up World Health Organization, radio frequency or electromagnetic fields, they still have old stuff up there that will make you think, oh, there's no scientific consensus, so it must be fine. How would you even know to dig further until you get to this page that talks about this new investigation that's going on? So there's just corruption at every turn, which is why we hope to be able to teach you to take this on for yourself, because there's no knight in shining armor coming to protect you. We have to learn it. And the power really does lie with the populace. But let's teach you what safe technology looks like. So 3 steps. The first step is a simple and inexpensive hardwiring setup. That literally means just plug in wires again and turn off the antennas. So on the back of your router, you'll see you have wireless, or I'm sorry, you have internet cable ports. So you just get a big long cable. If you're going to buy one, look for something that says shielded, because there's other man-made forms of energy, electric fields and magnetic fields that come off the wiring that can also be harmful to some people. Most of us have more than one device in our home, so you can buy something called an Ethernet switch. And again, these are not high expenses. In a classroom, you could get a switch that has 28 or 30 ports on it, so you can plug in multiple devices, and then just get a little Ethernet cable to go from the port to your device. Sometimes we have to get a little adapter, and who knew? For like $30, you can get an adapter for your iPhone or for your Android or your Google or whatever you have, and then just plug it into your device and then go in. And step 2 is to turn off the radiating antennas. And you just go into settings and you look for things like cellular data, Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, locator, hotspot. And for anybody who didn't know any better and upgraded to 5G, there are likely additional antennas in that one device. And each individual antenna is always going, here I am, where are you? Here I am, where are you? To try and make a connection to the nearest cell tower or router. And again, the message is not no technology. The message is common sense tells us, why would I have 6 or more antennas pulsating me when I'm only using one of the services? Right? Wi-Fi, if you're not using that service, turn it off. Bluetooth, turn it off. Locator, turn it off. Hotspot, turn it off. And keep everything off until you need to use something. And, you know, mobile technology was meant to be just that, when you're on the go and you're mobile. But the industry, you know, they keep pushing more and more. Oh, you can get better signal inside your house. You know, get this booster, get all this equipment. I simply forward. I go into my settings, into the phone tab, and there's a call forwarding. You can forward your cell phone calls right to your landline. If you got rid of your landline, you may want to rethink that decision. It's all about choice. So same thing with the laptops and the tablets. Just get the adapters, hardwire them to your router, go into everything and turn off the antennas. So that's step 2. Step 3, because the industry is pushing this 5G technology for the Internet of Things, they want to sell you every product today, every electronic product with wireless antennas inside them. So I'll give you an example. We had a kitchen stove for 26 years and it was on its last leg. So my husband saw a floor model on a good deal and he ordered it and it got delivered to our house. And it's got smart technology in it. Well, this smart technology would allow somebody who, and I don't know why you do this, but you could actually turn your stove on, your oven on, when you're not even in your house by using your cell phone. I think that's a pretty high risk, dangerous fire hazard, but whatever, they're selling us new, creative, innovative things. So we get this unit delivered to our house. I see it's smart technology. A girlfriend of mine had gotten a smart stove too, and we went right into her settings on the stove and we were able to disable the microwave radiation. On mine, I went all through the settings and I couldn't find anything. And then I looked at the manual and I found the fine print disclaimer under RF exposure, radio frequency exposure. And in the fine print, it told me, stay 20 centimeters away. And I'm like, what? how could I even cook 20 centimeters away from my stove? So that gave me a chuckle. So I wound up having to call the tech support for the company that made my stove, and they sent a technician out to my home. He was kind of a grumpy fellow. I pulled out my meter and said, look, in my home, this number is usually under 10. And right now that stove is radiating at 1,090,000. And he didn't want to hear any of that. So he went out and he waited in his truck. He grabbed his cell phone and said, fine, I'll go wait in my truck. So he did. And then he heard back from an engineer in his company, and he came in and he removed the back panel of my stove. Behind the digital display is the motherboard. And lo and behold, right next to the motherboard was this little tiny board that had the radio frequency antenna. All he had to do was go, and he unplugged it. And I remeasured, and my house was back down under 10. So that's why it is critically important to measure, because we don't know where these antennas are. And they typically come all full tilt all the time until we learn about it and then figure out how to disable them. So measuring with a radio frequency device is critically important. I know some neighbors go in together. The one that was recommended at the medical conference, the Safe and Sound Pro 2, is just under $400. And so neighbors sometimes go and pitch in together, and then they share it amongst themselves. Others put one in the library, and others who can afford to just buy one, because every product that comes through your door should be screened now. So we just talked about the devices that are under your own control. There are 3 other areas that we should all be aware of that may or may not be under your control. And the first is the utility smart meters or digital meters. When I was a little girl, I'm one of 10 kids. And so when we would play hide and seek, it would sometimes take a long time to be found. So I just sit there in the bushes, keeping myself occupied, watching the little dials go around on the old analog meters. And then the industry came through to our towns and said, hey, we can save your town some money if you get rid of those old analog meters. You won't have to pay to have a walker come through the neighborhood and take a manual reading every month. What town doesn't need a cost save? So it sounds like a great idea. But what our towns didn't know is that if there is an FCC ID number on your gas, water, electric, propane, solar, whatever meter, that is pulsing microwave radiation continuously. And when I was preparing to testify before the Massachusetts Department of Public Health, I went into my dining room where I have 2 electric meters mounted on the other side of the wall for our regular electric utility and then for our solar system. And I measured, and when I did the math, that thing was pulsing 17,000 times a day. And what happens if you have somebody on the other side of the wall getting pulsated day and night? Well, we know what happens. At the medical conference, they said when those smart meters go in, they have very high rates of patients coming to them with microwave sickness. And an additional risk is that this radio frequency, as I mentioned, it likes metal, it amplifies with metal. So the radiation can hop on the house wires and pipes and virtually turn a home into a giant radiating antenna. There are also serious dirty electricity issues that come with them, fires, explosions, improper grounding. And for those who care about their privacy rights, all that data is flying through the air, for one. And 2, the industry can take your data and sell it to third-party providers who want to sell you their products. So in worst case scenarios, somebody with a $100 application out on the curb in their car can be harvesting the data as it flies through the air, and then they will be able to see your usage patterns. They'll be able to see, hey, nobody's around during the day. They can back up their truck and take your toys, right? So huge issues around these smart meters. And it's also an environmental justice issue. As we know, these toxic corporations come into communities that are by and large underprivileged environmental justice communities where people might be working 3 jobs just to keep a roof over the head and food on the table, and they don't have time to tune in to these kinds of issues. So they'll roll out this toxic technology, and then say, hey, look, it was so great, like in Worcester, Massachusetts. Now let's roll it out across the entire state. And hey, New York, and hey, Rhode Island, and hey, Connecticut, look how great this was in Worcester. Let's do it everywhere. So that's what we're up against with the smart meters. Now, Jeremy Johnson is a Silicon Valley engineer, and his wife is a medical doctor, and both of them got crazy sick very quickly, and neither one of them, nothing in her medical background could help them sort this out. And what it turned out to be was a bank of smart meters that showed up in their condo complex, and they were very near to them. So Jeremy has done a TED Talk. If anybody would like to go out there and learn in about 15 minutes from Jeremy, it's a really good way to bring the engineers and the physicists and the technologists and so forth who think that wireless must be fine because it's on the market and we've been developing those products. The only thing that they've been taught is that you have to have heat to have enough, you have to have heat to have harm, and enough heat to actually break the atom. And the science is telling us that those heat limits are set, way up here. And the science is telling us that the harm is happening at hundreds of thousands of times below what those outdated FCC guidelines allow. So Jeremy's talk is a good one to share with people who are developing products so they can start where they are and start engineering products that are safe. So we talked about personal devices, we talked about smart meters, and now we'll just quickly cover cell towers. So in the beginning, these cell towers were permitted out in industrial licensed areas, way far away from the population, 300 feet up in the air. And then little by little, our government and the industry started allowing these to encroach closer and closer to where we spend all of our time. You'll see they'll be mounted on top of buildings, or they'll be put up on the sides of the building and painted the same color. You'll see those fake trees that have a whole pollution trail behind them, because all those fake tree things, they turn into debris that turn into microplastics that get into the ground and the water. So there's a lot of bad juju going on with these macro cell antennas, these big antennas. And so it's important to always go back to the non-industry funded science. And when I started learning all this, I was blown out of the water, way over my head. And then I couldn't remember where to find things that I later wanted to reference or share. And so being a technical writer, I just built myself a very simple repository called Understanding EMFs. And there's no bells and whistles. There's just bulleted items with a short statement in front of each telling you what this is about. So if you were to go to the cell tower page, you will find the studies that show biological hazard and that say we should not have these cell towers anywhere near us. And at the bare minimum, 500 meters or 1,640 feet away, because when the science is looked at, there's a death curve and a neurotoxicity curve and all the insomnia and all of that starts to come down and get closer to the regular population statistics at that 500 meter mark. It doesn't actually come up to the regular population statistics till almost double that. So 3,000 feet or more should be the minimum distance. And for children, the elderly, pregnant women, anybody with an existing health condition, they recommend at least a half a mile away. But again, there is no safe level of microwave radiation in the scientific literature. Distance is definitely your friend, but keep as much as you can. There's a US website called antennasearch.com. I will be empty nesting soon, and we may decide to move somewhere else. And so I go over there and I type in the address and I go and I look to see, before we even drive somewhere to look at a property, I go out there and I look to see what the big cell towers are that are listed and how close they are. And if they're not in my comfort zone, then we just don't even go look at that property. And we also have studies that show with cell towers that it drops property values significantly between 10 and 20%, because nobody wants to live under a cell tower. So there's good resources here. And goodness, they have done such a number on our big cities. When I was testifying with the Massachusetts legislature, I went and ran this report. And I put in our State House address down in Boston, and within 3 miles, there are 1,520 cell towers and 4,512 of these big monster antennas within just 3 miles of our State House. And that's what one neighborhood looks like on that map in Hyde Park in Boston. It's just, it's mind-boggling that they've been allowed to do this. Now, the third exposure that's out of our control are these 5G small cells. And so what the industry is spinning it is, this is for 5th generation technology. And everyone will think, oh, 5th generation comes right after 3rd, 4th, 2nd, 1st, whatever, not a big deal. They're promising that we'll have faster entertainment downloads, smart cities, super highways. But take a look at who's actually buying up the entertainment industry to promote all those faster streaming services. It's the wireless industry. So 5G can't fly on its own at this point in time. It has to use the existing big macro cell antennas as the backbone to allow 5G to fly. And all that's left to monetize, so right now your cell phone uses big long waves that come pulsating into your home. That's how you can get a signal inside of a building. All that's left to monetize are the little dinky waves called the millimeter waves. And they are very easily disrupted. They can't get through the glass, and they can get disrupted by a snowflake or rain or leaves and stuff. So 5G is the addition on top of all that other electro pollution. Now they're adding a whole new layer. And their goal is to put millions of these small cells in at the curb, not in an industrial park, outside our bedroom windows at bedroom height, every 2 to 12 houses. That's what 5G is. And we have reports of them literally coming in under the dark of night and clear cutting trees, or just lopping them off at the halfway point so their signal can get by, which is so bad for our communities. And here's the kicker. There was a congressional hearing up in Washington, D.C. with Senator Richard Blumenthal in the Commerce Committee. And he asked 2 of the industry leaders, so please share with us, how much money have you spent to do independent investigation on the biological health and safety of this new 5G technology? And these guys hemmed and hawed, and then ultimately they were forced to say, we don't know of any science that's been done. So Senator Blumenthal said, so we're basically flying blind here as far as health and safety are concerned. And then even Computer World and other industry magazines are saying 5G is a bad joke. It may be good revenue for the industry, but it's not actually giving the promised faster speeds than what we already had with 4G. So we don't need it. But there went Verizon last year and put out a press release that, oh, now 100 million people get to have 5G. And I know this is a touchy subject for some. You run the risk of throwing out the baby with the bathwater if you talk about COVID and 5G in the same breath. But again, we always follow the independent peer-reviewed science. And Dr. Beverly Rubik and Dr. Rob Brown published a very heavily peer-reviewed study in a very credible journal that shows evidence for a connection between COVID-19 and exposure to the radiation from wireless, including 5G. And so what they did is they went and they looked at the mortality statistics from COVID and the case rates of COVID in the cities that have turned on 5G. And there are statistically significant higher death rates and COVID cases in those communities where 5G is. And it makes sense because Think about what we discussed a little bit ago. Our biological cells only have so much energy to do what they're supposed to do. You leave this radiation pulsating 24/7, and now you've added on this whole new layer of these small cells at close range to where you're supposed to be getting good sleep. It's no wonder our bodies can't keep up. So use this resource at your own risk. It may turn some people off, but it's an important fact to know. So Dr. Magda Havas, who co-chaired the EMF Medical Conference, is a professor emeritus, meaning she retired with, honors from Trent University up in Canada. She taught electromagnetism for decades up there. And she recognizes that our governments, by and large, have dropped the ball, and most are not monitoring this cumulative electrosmog. And so she is asking citizens like you and I to partner with her and become citizen scientists. And if you purchase this Safe and Sound Pro 2 meter, then you will have the right equipment to go out into your community and take measurements down your main drag at 5 consecutive intersections, and use a little sheet that she has for you to put on your clipboard so everybody follows the same protocol. And she has what she calls this brag project: black, red, amber, and green. Can you brag about your city? So we then put our data into her database, and now she can map it out where, look at this, there are actually some green zones, but look at all the blackout ones and the raging red ones and the amber ones that are getting up into trouble zones. So if you want to be a citizen scientist, she would love your help. And if you go out to globalemf.net and say you would like to be a citizen scientist, if you can get in touch with them, then they will give you a discount code that you could use to get that Safe and Sound Pro 2 meter for, I think, like a 25% discount. So these Salzburg guidelines that you can look at here, there was a group of world leading scientists that got together in Salzburg some years ago and said, definitely we want to be at 10 or less in our indoor environments, but for the outdoor exposures, if you can manage to get it under 1,000 microwatts per square meter, provided you're not staying under that pulsation for any length of time and you have a clean setup at home where your body can cell repair at night, then even if we could get it down to 1,000 or less outdoors, then we'd be in fair shape. So let's take a look at what some of today's realities are. Again, the goal is to be 1,000 or less. Up in Westmoreland at their fire department, it was in the green at 417. In Keene, New Hampshire, it was starting to inch up into the thousands, into the yellow warning zone. And then in Nashua, they're already in the red zone, in Concord. And we took these measurements when the pandemic was in full swing. So there weren't people walking around outside with their polluting devices. There weren't many cars going by with all the radiation pollution that comes off of a lot of cars from all the wireless sensors. And we were still getting in the red zone on a very quiet day in Concord. And then in Stratham, New Hampshire, where the industry put a cell tower right up on their main drag, right next to some neighborhoods, it was in the black zone at 108,000. And then a resident in the north end of Boston, which is a highly trafficked tourist area because that's where all of our wonderful Italian restaurants and bakeries are. But look at the north end here. There are apartments or condos right above the businesses. And they have gone in and talked their way into putting these decorative, ornate, wrought iron looking posts that look like a light post. Well, these are fancy small cell antennas mounted right in the main walkway, all the way down Hanover Street. So they put the pretty ones up down the main drag. And then when you walk and look down to your left or your right to the crossroads, you see they put these ugly gray monopoles right up. So, I mean, all of them are bad and you don't want anyone near, but they take the cheap way out. They take the path of least resistance. And in the north end, we were getting readings as high as 613,000, and we want it to be under 1,000. So that's what a lot of our big cities are up against today. But let's take a look at encouragement from Dr. Martin Luther King. He taught us that when important changes happen in society, they come through three primary channels. One, the public gets informed and starts engaging. Two, it goes through the courts and the courts rule, and in this case, to bring the science to bear and then create public policy that represents the true science. So as depressing as it is when we first figure this issue out, we want to give you hope because there are incredible inroads happening at every turn. And so we'll quickly go through some of that and then leave you with more solutions that you can look toward. So when that National Toxicology Program reported clear evidence of cancer, and that should have triggered changes in public policy, the FCC entered their ruling into something called the Federal Register that said, no, we don't really need to change anything. As soon as that hit the Federal Register, the Environmental Health Trust, Children's Health Defense, and a number of other parties sued the FCC. And when the FCC went to court in this case, the judges were presented with 27 big fat binders full of evidence that had been put into the public record that the FCC was legally responsible for addressing, and they just blew it off. And so the courts ruled that the FCC was arbitrary and capricious. And I had to look that up. It basically means the FCC didn't do their homework based on all the science that's in the public record and the medical histories. So the court found the FCC guilty, as it were, and remanded it or sent it back to the FCC to say, hey, look, you got to do better. You have to account for environmental impacts, impacts on children. We need protections for the people with electromagnetic illnesses. And that was in August of 2021, and the FCC has not done one thing to inform the public or update their standards. Guidelines, they're not even standards. So there are lawsuits happening all over the country about this. This one is also groundbreaking. The Massachusetts Board of Health State Municipal Association has a set of legal guidelines for all the local boards of health, and they have now added 4 pages at the end of that legal guideline that talks about the cell tower issue and makes it very real for our towns. So in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, I mentioned they got one of these meters put on loan in their public library. And the reason they did that is because Verizon came in and put a cell tower on top of a neighborhood. And the day that was turned on, a little girl came down to her mama and said, "Mama, my head really hurts and I feel all buzzy inside." And mom did her research, and that was the day that Verizon fired up that cell tower with 6 antennas on it, and it's licensed for more than 40. I think it's licensed for 48. And just with those 6, that little girl and her big sister got sick, the mom got sick, the dog got sick, and those little girls were literally vomiting at night in their beds. They had skin rashes and all these other symptoms. And then lo and behold, they start talking to the other neighbors, ringing in the ears, heart irregularities, cancers, that over the last 2 to 3 years that this fight has been going on, cancers have come back that were in remission, and someone has already died from it. The neighbors have had to abandon their homes because they literally can't live there. And so in Pittsfield, for the first time in the US, the Board of Health did an 18-month investigation. They talked to the scientists, they talked to the doctors, they talked to the engineers, they talked to the telecom experts, and they wrote an emergency order calling Verizon to the table to tell them why they should not issue a cease and desist order. And Verizon has proven time and again to be a horrible corporate citizen, and they would not come to the table. And instead they went to the courts and said, well, we think that that's illegal for Pittsfield to do that. Now, mind you, the mayor of Pittsfield and their city council commissioned their Board of Health to do this investigation. And the Board of Health sought legal guidelines. They went to the state attorneys, who assured them that it doesn't matter what the FCC says. Once that tower is up and powered up, if it is causing harm in your community or there's a nuisance, then you have every right, just as you would with any pollutant in the environment, to take charge and get it fixed to protect the environment and the citizens. So the Board of Health went to their mayor and their city council and said, you know, this is how much it will cost us to take this to court, maybe around $50,000. And the mayor and the city council and the city attorney would not give their own Board of Health the funding to do their job. So now there's a civil suit, a citizen's lawsuit against the town of Pittsfield. And that is to give the power and the funding to the Board of Health to do their job. And that hearing is coming up on Tuesday, Valentine's Day. And if there's an opportunity for people to listen in, to dial in and listen to that hearing, then we will make that information available to you as we get it. We're waiting for it to be posted. So there's so much going on in the legal arena here in Massachusetts at this very prestigious boarding school where like Saudi princes send their sons to be educated. There was sickness happening because of the high-powered industrial strength wireless systems. And in this lawsuit, although they didn't win it, they had an important win within the case in that for the first time in the US, the courts recognize that you don't have to have heat from these devices to have harm. There is significant harm happening at the non-thermal level. So all these cases build off each other, and I'll leave it to you to go look further. So the people wake up, it goes through the courts, and ultimately public policy catches up. And we have some leading policy solutions to share with you. When Deb talked to her senator and her state rep, Patrick Abrami is an engineer, and like most engineers, he'd only been taught that you had to have heat. So Rep. Abrami, being a very good public servant, went and looked at the science for himself. And he had this major wow moment, like, wow, what are we doing here? So he started whittling out a bill. Deb introduced me to Rep. Abrami, and they got in his car and drove down from New Hampshire to Massachusetts. We spent the afternoon at my kitchen table enjoying some homemade chicken noodle soup, and we helped him to connect the dots. And he wrote into his bill very pointed questions like, why have Lloyd's of London, Swiss Re, and others already long ago recognized this as a world-leading risk? And they do not cover for damages. They put exclusions in their policies. And that leaves our towns on the hook for legal risk exposure and our schools. So why does that legal fine print say to keep this stuff away from the body? Why is the FCC ignoring the peer-reviewed science? And why do they not account for the biological effects, not the heat effects, but the biological effects? And why does the FCC allow 100 times more radiation than certain other countries? And why is nobody looking at the cumulative effect? Because the science shows us this is dose responsive. The more radiation you're exposed to from all these different sources, the greater the risk that you're going to get sick. So we were brought in to testify, and we were so grateful that leading scientists and doctors and Frank Clegg from Microsoft Canada flew in on his own time and dime and testified with us. In 7 months' time, we got that bill through the House, through the Senate, and under Governor Sununu's pen, and it became law that they had to take a year to investigate this issue. And then the pandemic hit. And even during the pandemic, they stuck to their 1-year deadline, and they continued to investigate and brought in not only the independent scientists and doctors and other experts, but they also gave 2 seats at the table to the industry. So everybody's at the table together. So this commission report is available online at Massachusetts for Safe Technology on our state's efforts page. And it's a fat one. It's 400 pages, and with great thanks to Deb, she volunteered her time to take minutes and record them at each one of the 13 commission meetings so that this is a completely transparent process. And in the first 17 pages, you find the executive summary and their 15 recommendations to start hardwiring to and through the premises with fiber optics and cabling, and migrating away from wireless as primary connectivity. We need to go to hardwired, safe, fast, reliable technology. So this is available, and again, less than a year. And so once the report was done, it came out in November, which was too late to introduce new legislation to start addressing the recommendations. So we didn't get to introduce legislation in 2021, but in 2022, they decided to start taking the first of the recommendations in no particular order. And they wrote a bill that would, and it was supported with bipartisan support, that would allow for setbacks based on the science. So at least 1,640 feet. And they also put in that we need a registry of harm because people are getting so sick and they have nowhere to collect that data. So they wanted a registry of harm. And what we didn't know at that point, or didn't understand, is that there had been a lot of turnover on that Science, Tech, and Energy Committee from 2019, when we first were in there testifying, to 2022. We assumed that they knew that this commission report was available and that they would have digested it already. But that was not the case. They had no idea. And so we lost time, and now this time we'll be better prepared. So Dr. Kent Chamberlain has a 20-minute presentation, and we can all access his slides to show the science on why we need these setbacks. And as part of the hearing testimony process, Frank Clegg from Microsoft Canada testified that wireless technology is no longer advanced technology. It has lived its useful life as a main source of connectivity. And you can read his full testimony there. It's just a couple of pages long, and it's a really good resource for you to take with you when you're establishing credibility on this conversation. So although they didn't pass this bill outright last session, they did vote 15-3, huge bipartisan support on this, that, yeah, we should be introducing some kind of new legislation in January. So now here we are in 2023, and New Hampshire just introduced this bill that we had a hearing on yesterday. This is House Bill 298, and a new approach was worked on this time. Instead of coming with something completely new, like that setback and registry bill, let's go into what is already on the books in the law of New Hampshire. So we're so very grateful to Scott McCullough. He is the attorney who did the legal oral arguments on the FCC lawsuit and won. And he is also representing the Pittsfield Civic lawsuit on Tuesday. And he's got other deadlines that he's on. So God bless Scott. He was so gracious to give us his time. He went and looked at what's in the law in New Hampshire, saw where it had been modified to strip local control from our towns, and he rewrote this piece of legislation to re-empower the local municipalities to retain their local control over siting of cell towers and small cells. And so he went in and rewrote that. We did our best to explain it yesterday, and we have an opportunity to connect some of the additional dots with the legislature. They're going to be meeting again in executive session next Monday afternoon. And we learned that executive session means that they powwow together, but there's no more public testimony coming in at that point. So thank you, by the way, to everybody who on short notice in New Hampshire went out there and posted their support of this bill in a very short turnaround. There's more than 150 people who took their time to go in and show their support. So that's where we are in New Hampshire. We are hoping to get this bill passed this session. We've got a long road ahead of us. So please stay tuned when there's an opportunity for others to lend their support. We will definitely reach out through my list and ask you to do such. Here in Massachusetts, we have multiple bills refiled. Senate docket 226 would form a commission like New Hampshire did Honestly, we'd like to change the language of that bill because we don't need to do what New Hampshire did. We now need to take their lessons learned and start coming up with meaningful actions. We have another device to protect children from handheld devices. We have one asking our state level schools authority to address this issue. We've been working with them for years at the state level, and they're simply waiting for higher authorities to tell them what to do, instead of proactively protecting the kids and their staff today. So I don't get our political systems, but that's where that is. We do have a smart meter choice bill that came up 10 years ago. And this session, Senator Michael Moore, with great gratitude for him for sponsoring this bill, he has also added an emergency preamble because Eversource and National Grid are telling our Department of Public Utilities that the existing fleet of smart meters or digital meters that they have out there are about to end their useful life cycle. And so they are proposing to put smart meters all over Massachusetts. And so this emergency bill would say, at a minimum, we need to give the public a choice for a no-fee opt-out from every one of these meters. So we're hopeful we'll get some real traction on that this session because the fleet is being replaced in the next couple of years. This is a new bill that Scott McCullough wrote for Massachusetts, and it addresses the fact that we need to codify in our laws that we all deserve to have civil rights around what we're exposed to in our environment. So that's a new bill. And then he also went and looked into where other illnesses like Parkinson's, for example, are codified in our laws to offer protections and supports for that. So wherever those kinds of protections are already in the law, Scott has interjected electromagnetic sensitivities, which is a term that ADA uses, to recognize those so that wherever like mold toxicity and COVID and all these other things are being logged into our medical systems, we should now be able to log in, doctors can log in electromagnetic illnesses, and then we have a reporting mechanism. When you have a reporting mechanism, you have data, and from your data, you can set public policy and make decisions for the benefit of the public. So we're so grateful again to Scott for pitching in with us. I know he is completely flat out right now, and the fact that he gave us some time to work on this with us is just one of the biggest gifts there is to be had. Now in Connecticut, Stamford State Representative David Michel is from France, and he knows that France has stronger protections. They're not perfect, but they have some protections in place. And he's getting, you know, like a call from a woman who's crying on the phone because the smart meter is making her so sick. He has constituents reaching out to him who got a letter and said, "What's this? There's a small cell that's going to be installed in my front yard." So he is representing his citizens, as is Representative Ann Hughes, and they have proposed a bill to address small cells, smart meters, and the right to choose. They would like to see an opt-in bill like Hawaii. One of the counties in Hawaii has an opt-in on smart meters, so it's not automatically assumed that you're going to get one. You have to go opt into it. So we are hopeful that the way their system works is you propose a bill and then it goes to a committee chair. In this case, it's Tech and Energy. And that committee chair decides if they're going to allow the bill to be introduced. And so we are very hopeful that that next step will happen in Connecticut. And there may be others that are introduced right now. January is the big month to introduce legislation. So we're still catching up with what might have been filed. So if you know about other bills, maybe in Ohio or Idaho or Arizona or California, please let us know and we will keep track of that too. So just some examples, you know, when you bring this issue up, the industry will tell your town, oh, those are just the NIMBYs, the not in my backyard people. Nobody else is really concerned about this, which is simply not the truth. Americans for Responsible Technology has a webpage that shows there are more than 150 groups all over the country doing what we're doing to try and get safe technology. And you can poke through examples here in Massachusetts, even just on the cell towers. And so towns themselves are taking action. Boston has made some important filings with the FCC saying that we believe the public. Years ago, Boston and Philadelphia partnered together to file with the FCC to say, we need to address this. We need to make sure there's safety for electrosensitive people. And then here in Burlington, Massachusetts, they convened a committee with members from all their town boards, including health, and they hired a special attorney, Donna Brewer, who is a land expert and knows a good deal about telecom law and the boundaries with that. And they came up with a policy that said, you know, you got to be compliant with ADA. You can't put these poles where a wheelchair and stuff can't get by. It's got to blend in with the natural environment. But then they took it further and said, if we approve small cell applications, the applicant or the vendor has to come back every single year and recertify that that equipment is still compliant with current law. And we as a town don't have that expertise. So you, vendor, are going to have to pay the town of Burlington to hire an independent consultant to do that recertification. The night they rolled out that small cell policy, the Verizon attorney was at their council meeting or select board meeting. And Dan Klasnick basically said, well, we don't want to set a precedent for an annual review or for a fee, because mind you, they want to install millions of these all across the country, and they certainly don't want to have to pay to come back every year instead of just dropping and running with their equipment as they're prone to do. So they withdrew their 7 small cell applications. So it's critically important that our towns come up to speed on this and not be afraid to hire an attorney who actually knows telecom law, because most of our town attorneys do not. So our friends at Americans for Responsible Technology and other groups have taken these lessons learned from around the country and come up with an example that every town can start with and at least get going. They've got checklists, they've got a sample ordinance, they have real ordinances that other cities have already approved and put in place. And after I gave a talk to the Hanscom area towns, which is a consortium of 4 towns and their select boards, Bedford and Lincoln turned right around in the coming months after that, and they adopted the Burlington small cell policy and improved upon it. Other towns have done the same thing. So here are other examples, you know, of towns taking action on this, if that can help to empower your town. So I love to show Easton, Connecticut. There was a grandmother there who figured out what 5G is, and she went to her town, and their local board had a medical doctor on it, and they looked at this issue and they said, well, guess what? Until the FCC and the industry can prove that this is safe, we don't want it in Easton. And they put a moratorium up, and they just re-upped that moratorium last year. So towns are taking action. Hawaii County put up a resolution that they don't want 5G, and this is happening all over the world. So a quick few words about our schools. As I mentioned, the industry came in and pushed in their 21st century classroom, right? Well, guess what? The New York Times did a 3-part expose that Silicon Valley executives are sending their children to schools with no technology, not wireless, not even hardwired. They know a child's brain doesn't develop best in the shallows of a screen. It properly develops through meaningful interactions with trusted adults, their peers, and the natural environment. So here's one of them. Silicon Valleys are phone police for kids. They're making them sign contracts that there will be no screens around their children. To our good fortune, our friends at Grassroots Environmental Education, which has their project for Americans for Responsible Technology, they have taken on this other project called Tech Safe Schools that has information that they will send for you. If you gather up the names and addresses of the decision makers in your school district, they will send out a packet of information that you can then follow up with. And it talks about the biological risks, the legal risk exposure that our schools have unwittingly assumed, and most importantly, how to remediate this, how to just simply choose safe technology and quit radiating the kids and all the staff. But I will again tell you, do not go it alone. If you activate any of this stuff, I strongly recommend that you educate everybody around you first. Get the parents, get the grandparents, because they recognize the Big Tobacco Playbook when they see it, and they're no longer beholden for financial commitment to an employer. So they're free to speak up and to act up. And because they have more discretionary time, they often want to give back to their communities. So we'll share with you in a minute some resources. But my big mistake, even though I was successful in at least getting this little sign up in our classrooms, if I had a do-over, I wouldn't have gone to the schools until I had a cadre of adults behind me and mature adult students to step up and say, yeah, we really are not going to take our eye off of this until we get it fixed, because one voice is very easily swept under the rug. The Massachusetts Breast Cancer Coalition has now developed curriculum for K through 12, and it's out there. All of our schools can be putting this in. They've got guides for the students, guide for the teachers. And then Dr. Alexia McKnight lives down in Pennsylvania. She's one of the unfortunate ones who got so sick from a smart meter. And she and I were given the opportunity to go in and do training with their public schools. So on this professional development day for health and wellness, we gave 4 talks throughout the day. So that could be an opportunity in your district. And it was their student services or special education director who invited us in, and the technology director. So a lot of people sort of know about this issue. It's very different from 10 years ago when I got started. So, you know, expect the worst. Expect they're going to say, oh, the FCC says it's fine. So yeah, we're good. We're just going to stick with that. And then work with us and we can teach you how to take the conversation further. But that video is available to share with your schools, as is this curriculum and all these resources here. So, and again, we now have this schools and families course back online. We can train the entire school. We'll do bulk discounts or sliding scale. We just need to cover our expenses, and we want everybody to know about this. And then our friends at the Environmental Health Trust have just a whole toolkit of things that you can print out, from little cards you can carry with you to things you can give to your doctors, to posters you can put up at your work or your schools. Many, many resources, and some have been translated into Spanish and maybe Portuguese, I want to say, but go take a look because everything changes. Maryland has become the first state agency to recommend hardwiring in the schools. And there's another really good resource that guides on green schools. And Dr. Tony Stein worked really hard to get this section on how to create low EMF environments. So we have so many resources. And in Cyprus, in the pandemic, they came up with recommendations for studying at home by age, and tell us that children should not be on these screens, right? And they give age limits, you know, certain minutes per age. And they recommend the hard wiring and to keep as much distance if something does have to transmit, and to, you know, find the balance. Don't leave your kids in front of screens. For healthcare practitioners, there's a medical conference. Dr. Cindy Russell and others founded Physicians for Safe Technology so that healthcare practitioners can go look at these highly credible resources listed there. And again, we have resources for the engineers, physicists, and technologists. And then for you guys at home or at work, if you're not a do-it-yourselfer and the wires intimidate you, seriously though, it's not anything shocking to do. You plug one end into your router, you get the little adapters to the Ethernet cables, and then you plug your device in on the other end. If you have to get more than one device hooked up, you get a little Ethernet switch. It's not rocket science. But I know that might have intimidated me a few years back. So there are professionals who are certified and trained through very rigorous training on electromagnetic fields. Many are also trained in the other indoor pollutants like air quality, water quality, molds, all the off-gassing and formaldehydes. You can hire a professional to come into your home to do these assessments. They will present you with a report as part of their fee, and they will recommend next steps. And then you can decide what to do from there. And they often know resources who can help you come in and get it fixed. This film, Generation Zapped, was chosen to be included in the United Nations Film Festival, and it's picked up all sorts of accolades along the way. In 74 minutes, you and your loved ones can just sit together and learn, and it's done beautifully. There's some humor, but you will hear from world-leading scientists, doctors, and far too many people have been harmed, and then they also present the solutions. This came out in 2018, and as we know, much has changed with public policy, and with the law. So I have been invited to come in and do screenings of Generation Zapped many times, and then I can help to provide the facts from that point in time to where we are today. But it's still a really good tool to open up the conversation. And then Bert Wolf on PBS, Camilla Reese and Dr. Erica Mallory Blythe and others did a 2-part series with him. I think these are 28-minute episodes that are available on PBS. So that could be a very mainstream way of inviting people into the conversation. And then here's what the toolkit looks like at Americans for Responsible Technology, where you will find signs, letters to the editor, letters to your neighbors, sample municipal codes, sample legislative language. So we're all working so hard to try and empower you to find the courage and the confidence to go out there, because if the public's not doing it, your town's not even going to know this is going on. So lots of great resources for us. And just be careful with the kids in your life. They are big fans of monkey see, monkey do. So if you're in front of your screen all the time, guess what? You've just given them permission to be in front of theirs all the time. So we've got to set limits for ourselves and model that good behavior. And I love this poster, 50 Ways to Take a Break. You can print that out from here too. And it reminds us what we used to do with our free time before people fell down the black hole of the screen. Go out and dance, go do an act of kindness for somebody, meditate, make music, journal, write, get together with a friend, go see a movie together, go for a hike in nature, all these amazing things, go climb up a tree. So just remember to find the balance in your life. And then Clint Obear and Dr. Stephen Sinatra had written one of the first books on earthing or grounding, and showed all this science that backs up that every living thing on our planet is meant to be connected to the earth, because it gives us important energy. It gives us electrons that come up and help to regulate our bioelectrical systems. Now we find that we live in a world where we're driving around in cars with rubber sneakers on them. We're wearing shoes of our own that have rubber soles. Or if you happen to be lucky enough to have a leather sole, that's conductive with the earth, but there might be a metal plate somewhere in the sole that breaks the earth's connectivity. So I understood the science and the benefit and the healing importance of being physically connected to the planet. But I'm like, I live in the Northeast. Come on, 6 months out of the year, I can't go walking barefoot out there. Then Dr. Laura Conover, poor thing, right as the pandemic kicked off, she was ready to launch her book called The Earth Prescription. And Dr. Conover takes grounding or earthing by each of the 4 seasons and offers all these wonderful, fun things that we can do to ground naturally with our shoes on. Like, who knew? If you've got a pet on the grass and you pet the less furry areas like the snout or the ears, you will instantly be grounded through the grounding that that creature has. Or if you're outside walking and it's cold, just touch the leaves or the pine needles, any high water content, and you are instantly grounded through the grounding of that plant or tree. So lots of solutions at every turn. And then here's a whole slew of things that you can use to work with your town on this. The Centers for Disease Control and Protection already has something called the ALARA principle. And that means that when we're dealing with radiation, We need to get to as low as reasonably achievable with these emissions. And they base it on the amount of time you're exposed. You want to create as much distance as you can. If you can't get away from it, then you can do shielding. And shielding has to be done very carefully because there are a lot of things that can backfire and make you sicker. So always work with a professional on that one. But it's high time that they update the CDC's website to account not only for ionizing radiation, which is like the sun and the gamma rays and X-rays. We would never leave ourselves exposed 24/7 to that. Well, the same principle applies to our exposure to these man-made, low-level, non-ionizing emissions of microwave radiation. So let's let that be our guiding post. Get to ALARA. And when our towns investigate, it's critically important that we underscore that we do so and differentiate the industry's priority, which is to make money for their shareholders. So they take the path of least resistance. And so they start throwing up all of this wireless infrastructure that is placed very irresponsibly. So we need to differentiate between the public's interest and the industry's interest. And with great thanks to Dr. Timothy Sheckley, Camilla Reese, and others at this Public Policy Institute, we now have this guidebook called Reinventing Wires, the Future of Landlines and Networks. And in addition to the health issues, they talk about a dozen reasons why wireless is no longer sufficient. We need to be bringing the cabling of the fiber optics to and through the premises. And like we talked about with our own personal devices, it's critically important to always measure, not against the FCC exposures, because they just got sued for not protecting us, but against these biological effects. And Safe Living Technologies, which puts out that meter we spoke of. Rob Metzinger is the president of that company. He's also one of the instructors at the Building Biology Institute who trains professionals in this. And they have, a sheet here that tells us what is the goal. We want to be at 10 or less indoors and 1,000 or less outdoors. So we have all these resources. So what might you do next? Just accept there is no safe level of this man-made radiation in the scientific literature. And Dr. Linda Birnbaum, who was in charge of the National Institutes of Health when that study was done, she's now retired. And she says that, yeah, there are captured agencies, but there are still a lot of really good people working in our federal agencies. But she suspects it's going to take a bubbling up from the local and state efforts before we're going to see meaningful change at the federal level. And so that comes right back down to you and I. We have to come out of our comfort zone and take these baby steps to get the conversation going. So we need to educate the public. We are doing these free public education webinars twice a month now. If you go out to Massachusetts for Safe Technology, you can register, and you can take the flyer each month and print it out and go put it up in your local library, go put it up in your office, go put it up if you go to a gym, and anywhere else in your town where you're allowed to put things on a bulletin board, because you may well not even know it, but you might save somebody's life. And then I've been brought in to co-host forums in communities. Sometimes they're local, sometimes they're regional, sometimes they're state. But here are examples when you open this conversation up with your town. Look at what Tri-Town Health in Massachusetts did. They had a forum. It was billed as an educational forum. It wasn't about any controversy. Let's learn the facts and then know what decisions we have before us. And it's critically important that we get these schools trained, because our kids are not doing well today. 50% of children have chronic illnesses. Others are suffering from anxiety and depression, nosebleeds, headaches. And this is a huge factor. So start where you are. Maybe you work outside of the home. Maybe you work inside of the home. Get your neighbors on board with this. Get your friends on board with this. If you belong to professional associations, see if we can get on the speaking docket for them. They're always looking for speakers for their conferences. But start where you are and get this important conversation going. And together, we all just might really do something meaningful. So our town should be doing all of this here. And again, we'll give you our slides, and don't be afraid to encourage your town to hire a good attorney. So for today, if you're new to this, just, cut yourself some slack. None of us knew. Now that you know, just start taking stock. What is radiating around me? Start with baby steps. Create a sleep sanctuary above all else at the beginning of your journey, because if your body can't repair itself, there's going to be downstream effects for most people. And then start looking one by one. Okay, now that I've accepted this and gotten my mind around it, what can I hardwire? And start doing that. And then when you're on the go with your devices, choose airplane mode. If you keep your phone in airplane mode, you can, anything that's on that device, you can still use. The alarms, the clocks, the music, the camera, anything that you've put on there, your games, it's there to enjoy in airplane mode. You don't need to be sending and receiving data. Same thing with your wearables. Choose airplane mode and go out to Environmental Health Trust and grab their resources. They did it for you. You can print them out. You can send them to your local printer, get as fancy as you want. But thank you. We know that this is like drinking water from a fire hose, as Dr. Lynn Patrick said at our first medical conference. But now you know, you're halfway there. So reach out to us. Let us know how we can help in your community. And I will stop my screen share now and ask Deb if we have any questions in the chat.
There are no chat questions. People may have questions, and if you do, please raise your hand.
Okay.
Feel free. Silent group.
I know. Well, thank you so much, everybody. And I know a number of you who joined us live are returning students who have come to learn a number of times.
Oh,
And come back as often as you want.
Paul
because
has his hand
we're here
raised,
for
Cece.
you. Okay. Paul, go ahead.
Well, I just want to talk a little bit more about what happened up in New Hampshire. So you can do that now or after you
No.
to everybody go, either one.
That's fine. We can take 5 minutes if you would like. We're going to end this at 8 o'clock Eastern time.
Sure.
But yeah,
Okay.
so a
So I
lot
listened.
of really encouraging things happened during that hearing. There are 8 new members of that committee. And as we learned at the end of last session, when that bill was finally tallied up at the end, they weren't quite ready to put those setbacks in place. They could either vote that we've heard enough and we don't really want to talk about this issue anymore, so we're not going to endorse any new legislation. Or they could say, yeah, we think there's something here. And thankfully, they did the latter. So we walk a very fine line.
Well, they did that last time. They voted to do something.
But the lesson learned there was we can't go in with both guns blazing. And that's why this time we went in with
no, hold on. When you say both guns blazing, a setback was both guns blazing?
Well, it was because it was brand new.
Yeah.
So the approach this time
Mhm.
was to start with where they are. And Scott McAuliffe was very gracious to look at their current law, see where industry or this ALEC organization had gotten in and strict local control. And then he wrote legislation that would reverse that and re-empower them. And he had to go by what he was asked to do by the legislators because they know their systems. And Paul, I know that you wish there were other things that were done with that bill, but we can't just do what we want. We have to make it hopefully work within their systems.
No, those are all completely choices. So the answer is that you can look at everything strategically to figure out what is the best way to get to where you need to go. What's interesting to me is that there is federal standards, which were discussed, and state standards. And yes, of course, the wires industry is trying to game the state legislation to ratchet things in stronger than the federal standards. So my question is, why is it not a goal to essentially repeal that language and take all that out?
That is, if you go, Paul, and if you look at section 12-K 10.2, I think it is, you can read the language in there where they stripped local control. And what Scott's bill says is we will take that language out and replace it with this language. And this language restores local control.
Okay, so I read the bill and I didn't see the crossouts. So we're saying they're
No,
just
he's
saying,
replacing. Yeah,
okay.
he's
So,
replacing. So you
all
have
right.
to go back to the original statute and look at that. And I can see where that's confusing, but
Yeah, well, that would be a good idea to put right in the bill as you present it.
yeah.
Because that was one issue. And the other issue is that the language was only dealing with the modifications
Of the
of things.
co-locations.
Yeah.
Yeah. But once they get this codified, then I think they will then be able to use that for new installations.
I don't know how, I don't follow that at all. Why is
Yeah.
that now
Well,
reflect new
let's see.
installations?
We were taking off one bite of this at a time, and what Scott was advised to do by the legislators. So
All right. So my suggestion
don't
strongly
think
is to everybody involved is to
Mhm.
move your chips much more firmly and squarely in the front of the table. That's not going out with both guns blazing. That is going out with essentially statements of fact, which even though you're trying to soft pedal here, still can be made and then gives you things to negotiate away and keeping the things you really need.
yeah, and
By
you know,
not asking for enough,
Scott
this is
McCullough has a whole career on this. So, and Paul, I know you've worked really hard on this issue too.
and I'm going to underscore to you too that Scott McCullough does not have a whole career on this. Scott
He
McCullough
has a
has
whole career with the telecom industry.
no, correct. He has a whole career on doing APA hearings for the telecom industry. That is different than writing and negotiating
Actually,
a bill through,
He has very deep experience with writing legislation.
as do other people. I understand that. And so the point is that what you should do is make sure that you have a large enough, and look, the people who make this call are the New Hampshire people. Okay. So you're an outsider, I'm an outsider, Scott's an outsider. We're all outsiders. Okay.
I'm not.
Good. Well, then you should be very aware of what the options are. And you shouldn't necessarily just go along with outsiders' recommendations. And you should do the things that are going to lead to your greatest chance for success. And everybody wants a good outcome for New Hampshire, but the end of the day is you're taking the risk because you live there. So these are always your calls. And it's the call of Ricciardi and whoever. I don't sense that the sponsor of the bill knows that much. At least what little things he
We're
said.
all learning, Paul. We're all learning not only about what the industry's up to, but about the system in New Hampshire through which change is affected.
Mhm.
We are very gracious to Lucius Partial for sponsoring this bill in the House, and he serves on that committee. And we're very grateful to Senator.
Well, I'm
Denise.
glad he's there too, but he didn't say much, so we don't really know much about him.
Who was there too?
The guy who sponsored the bill kind of said something very brief and then
Yeah.
just gave it over to Denise. Denise did a fairly good job of defending and deflecting a bunch of these questions.
Yeah. And so
Um,
we're getting answers to those questions to the committee members before they meet on Monday. So just
Okay.
know we are working tirelessly in the
Okay, so my
background.
strong suggestion to anybody in New Hampshire is
Mhm.
to take a look at a significant amendment of the language of this bill to be able to put in things that you really want. And the whole point there is to make sure that's part of the discussion and then be prepared to negotiate away some things. If you're only going in for what you think you can get, they're still going to try to extract concessions from you. And you're
We
going to
know-
end
we
up
know
with
that.
much
And Scott
smaller than
Yeah.
you want in the end. And
Scott
so,
understands that too, Paul. We are at the top.
well,
of the
you
hour.
didn't go in really
If
asking for
you-
enough,
if
in my
you
opinion.
would
It's
like-
okay for me to finish.
Paul, we have heard you.
Cece.
Yeah.
No, well, I'm not sure everybody has. So I'm communicating to everyone. Not everybody read my email.
Yeah,
So
no,
I
that's okay. If
Good.
you would
So
like to
may I
send
finish,
Deb
please?
Hodgson some information, we will make sure that you can reach out to her. But for now, we're going to thank everybody for their time, and we.
Okay, so we
look
can't
forward
finish.
to
Is
meeting
that
with
the
you
idea?
next. We are done right now.
Okay.
Um,
All right, Cece, I hung
because-
in there to try to have a bit of a discussion about this.
Okay.
And was very polite and listened all the way to the end. I think you should be open to more discussion.
Yeah, but tonight is not the place for it.
Right.
If you want to have a private meeting with Deb, then we can arrange for that. So thank you very much. Peggy Barton, did you have your hand up briefly to say something before we go?
No, I just wanted to say how fantastic this is and your job, and just thank you so much. I'm just saying bravo,
Aw.
whatever.
Thank you so much. It takes a village, Peggy, and I look forward to helping you over in Hopkinton as you get things
Thank
lined
you.
up over there. All right, everybody. Thanks so much and have a lovely rest of your day.
Okay,
Thank
goodbye.
you.
Bye-bye.